Obrigado, Dalton.
Thank you, Dalton.
O legal desse debate é que a gente vai ficando.
The nice part of this debate is we get more and more confused as it goes along. You have deflation, inflation, and then you have a scenario of deflation and inflation together. Now we have a third scenario, which is a derivative of the illustration of Dr. Miller, which is the inverted pyramid, where the base is the monetary base, which is what the Fed can cause. A little bit above it is M1, the money in the economy, which increases consumer prices. And what's above this are the assets, the M2, M3, M4, and the assets are a different category of prices that can have a behavior that's distinct from the prices that we capture in the different basket of goods that we calculate M1 with. M1, remember, as we said earlier, it was you use it to calculate inflation. It tends to, in the U.S., they tend to focus on an inflation index, and it looks like this will happen in Brazil as well, which is the core inflation, which they joke that it's made by economists that exclude food and energy. Electricity. It was made by economists that don't eat and don't use a car and don't have electricity at home. This is the dynamic that we have. We have 15 minutes here to the end of our debate. We need to know what people should buy. Are they going to buy gold or sell gold? Are they going to buy bonds or sell bonds? And that's what they want to know. This is the challenge. There's a question on the audience. Helio, my question is very much the same idea. Okay, in this scenario, you have uncertainty. There's everything for inflation to happen except for the match. And in Dalton's view, this match, even lit, might not cause the explosion that you would think. Okay, where do you preserve capital? What assets could you enter to minimize over the next 5 years your losses? Very well. I think without a question, no one will be surprised to know that gold. It's the excellent asset in a deflationary scenario. I think excellent in a hyperinflationary standpoint. I'm not sure if it's great if you have low inflation. History doesn't support that very much. But I think it's a more remote possibility. So I have no doubt that gold should be central to any portfolio based on any economic principle, not necessarily Austrian. You need a hedge. You don't know what's going to happen. Gold gives you that for free, because while it's a hedge, it also is capital producing. Without any doubt. In a deflationary scenario, you can buy bonds, maybe 2 or 3 years longer. I don't see this being resolved in the U.S. in the short term. Unless you think that we're going to have a very rapid fiscal adjustment, intergenerational fiscal adjustment. This would be the ultimate unraveling. Although in that scenario, gold would still be okay in the medium and long term. The biggest problem today, and the only protection that I have, is gold for almost an accounting reason. When you have a deleveraging of credit, you do the write-down of the asset and the liability. What's the only asset in the world that is not someone else's liability? Every other asset has a liability on the other side. The only asset that doesn't, the only asset that's not someone else's liability is gold.
Então, essa razão, vamos chamar contábil,
This accounting
é
reason
o grande motivo para você ter ouro.
is the great reason for you to have gold
De incerteza como
in an uncertain environment like ours.
ações, eu diria que
Stocks, I would say,
você tem que ver um real business cycle, né?
you have to really look at the real business cycle.
Muito favorável que eu não vejo.
You have to be in a good moment, which I don't see happening.
Brasil ainda
I think in Brazil,
valor escondido em
we have a lot of hidden value in companies
taxas de juros reais
because we have huge interest rates that have been lowered.
são sete. A capacidade de extrair valor
The ability to extract value
no médio prazo é
in the
absolutamente infinita aqui.
medium term is very high here.
Valorização muito baixa, então eu não sou tão cético com
I'm not so skeptical about Brazilian stocks.
para ações sobre
I would
alguma
never buy U.S. stocks at this time.
I think that we need to leave the Japanese situation out of this scenario because regarding several aspects, it's not comparable to the U.S. There is a huge difference, especially regarding the financial market. Japan entered and continued being the largest credit for the world during the crisis. The U.S. or entering the U.S. as the greatest debtor globally. This is a key difference in terms of the financial positioning. Second of all, the U.S. has savings rate which is insufficient to fund their debt. But the Japanese, during the crisis, they still had an excess of savings, including by funding their credit, because that was the only way that it was possible for Japan to continue having surplus in their current account, which is completely different when you compare to the U.S. condition, which ever since the 1980s has had deficit in their current account. So it's a completely different situation with Japan. Now, with the American society, it's more similar to Latin American countries when they entered the crisis in the 80s with insufficient exports power, insufficiency power in terms of savings, to keep excessive debt levels. And in addition to that, which makes it worse for the U.S., is that right now I think it's the third or fourth country, if we include Libya, costs a fortune in terms of their intervention, and that has a strong impact on the increase of oil level, the price of oil. And more and more there's a growing mistrust in the dollar. And China has been openly saying that they're not going to accept the dollar, that they're looking for alternative means of payment. And this could be a catalyst. If China decides that they don't want to accept American dollars or any other oil exported countries, and if the U.S. really needs to pay their oil bill, that would be a sign, not of inflation, but clearly of hyperinflation if that happens. There's a question here from Peringe. Elio, I'd like to congratulate the organizers of this event, yourself actually, and the speakers that have been so competent to talk about this practical side of economics and finance. Now, Dalton and Mueller have done a great job. And this is something that we've known for a long time from the financial markets. Now, Dalton raised something pretty interesting in one of his charts, saying that Fed was not active enough. You say active is something positive usually, right? Something good. Either you're active or passive, right? It's usually good to be active. So I was wondering, what you mean by saying active, whether or not it's negative. And the second thing is, today we have recession, right? So there's that sudden drop in the amount of money in the economy. Now, when will that go up? And Dr. Friedman says this is a temporary bout of purchasing power. It means that sooner or later, Friedman, a monetary man, and we as Austrians, we say that surely when Fed tries to balance that money, they don't have the money, so there's Fed intervention saying, I'm going to intervene and put 100. Pretty soon this will reach 200. And praxeologically speaking, this leads us to the human action, right? Is that a question or a comment? I couldn't get it. Oh, it was a comment. Okay.